I'm Eric Chemi, and this is Politely Pushy. Alex, thanks for joining me here on the show today. I've got so many questions for you. I've loved seeing you being quoted in the press. You're not shy, right? You're not shy from sharing your opinion. You're always willing to give your opinion. But first, I need to get a better sense for the company. Is it thoughtful? Is it thoughtful automation? Is it thoughtful.ai? I know you've got these digital workers, AKA bots. So I need to get a sense of exactly how you see yourself in this world, because there's so much to talk about in your space right now, especially the way AI is taking over. So just level set us for exactly what the company does and maybe who your customers are in terms of who's in the market for what you're offering.
Absolutely. Thanks, Eric, for having me. Really excited to talk about AI, automation, bots, and just go deep in this space as it's definitely being a trending topic recently. So we are thoughtful, just thoughtful. Our domain is thoughtful.ai. Formerly, we're thoughtful automation. And our mission is to accelerate the adoption of automation AI so humans can solve our most complex existential problems. We see this as being a need to really get to the next layer of humanity. And so, this is definitely a topic that's in the media right now. It's very much popularized by other fear. You hear a lot of fear, like everything's taking away jobs. And I hope today we can show that this is actually should not be based in fear. This should actually be people should be excited by this technology. This is going to help get us to the next layer where we're not stuck behind computers operating workflows and all this software. That's not really what humans are meant to do. So let me dial it back. Let me tell you the origin story. I think it's really how did I get here? Like, how did I get into bots? Like, why is this important?
Yeah, there's a robot behind you. That photo behind you is a robot.
Yeah, it's a Banksy. I like it. So he's spray painting. This is like the human genome, or like the sequence code for a human.
Yep.
And like the bot is like spray painting the human. So I thought that was fun to put behind me. Very poetic. Oh yeah, there's my camera moving. So I started my career back in 2009 building large ERP systems like SAP for large aerospace contractors. Really learning how to build just large scale systems and deploying to hundreds of humans. So all my job was to help build a system, build a process, then train. I'm going to use human users because I think it's a really big distinction as we talk about like what a human's doing and a robot's doing. So 12 years ago, humans really, the focus was operating the system. So logging in, doing the work, logging out, spending most of their day and their labor wage doing that. I had a lot of great experiences. I went to business school, I focused on entrepreneurship, and I really wanted to focus on solving a core problem. And so actually after business school, I went back to one of my first clients, and this new technology called RPA was out, robotic process automation. Robotic process automation is essentially an Excel macro on steroids. Think, it can log into the guided user interface, which is what a human sees, and it clicks through the buttons, and it can do what a human can do. And I thought that was a really revolutionary technology. But then I also saw a lot of problems. It was expensive. Humans didn't really know how to work with the bots. There wasn't really an interface where you could trigger the bots. So I thought, wow, this is a really compelling area and a really great place to start a company. I think this is, if you look back at some of the most game-changing technologies, just even think about people that used to do the telephone operators. They would put the switches back in, right? And now that's not a job. So I kind of have this vision, like in 20, 30 years, we're going to look back and people like hitting the keyboards and doing all the workflows. It's going to seem silly that we actually touch the computers and operating the systems. So I thought, all right, well, at least there's some maybe defensibility in that career move is getting into that space. I saw a lot of problems in the RPA space, how expensive it was, really only Fortune 100, 500 could afford it. And I thought this was a great place to start a career. Enlisted one of my best friends, Dan Parsons, as my co-founder. He was the original angel investor, cut me a check, and we were off to the races. And it's been really exciting because I think our approach is really unique and different. We build bots faster than anyone in the world. We help deploy them, and we help customers really see success with deploying automation AI at scale. And it's not just for the big enterprise. A lot of our customers are mid-market healthcare customers, 100 to 500 employees that would normally be priced out of this type of technology. We're coming in and bringing it at 10% of the cost at sometimes 2 times more effective rates. And so we're really excited to be democratizing this technology and teaching people about this and getting more bots in the system. So I'm happy to stop there. There's a lot. I'm sure you have some questions. What is a bot? Like what does that mean? Like there's chat bots, there's Twitter bots, like there's all these bots out there, right? And so like, what are these bots?
Your actual intelligence is spot on, right? Because that was going to be my next question is how do you define like what is a bot, smart bot? What is it capable of? And you mentioned there's different kinds of bots. And it's like, how do we, excuse me, how do we get away from this idea that a bot equals one worker, right? How do we make it think of just like, this is a software tool, right? This helps you do a bunch of things, right? Like the analogy is not one-to-one. I think we've heard these stories in the past of like, oh, we need to tax robots as if they are employees. It's like, but they're not employees. They're not people, right? One person, we see in the military, one person can manage many drones, for example. Is each drone, they're not separately piloted, right? So this idea of scale, what's your perspective on it? And I know I've asked a lot there, but what is a bot fundamentally? When someone random comes up to you, right? A non-technical, non-industry person that is just a family member or a friend, say, what is a bot? What do you actually tell them?
Yes, but its simplest form, as I mentioned, it's a macro or an Excel macro on steroids. It basically just mimics what a human does in a computer workflow. So Eric, let's say your job was you log in every day, you read your email, you take that email, you need to put it into separate systems, 3 or 4 systems you need to process, maybe some healthcare claims, some invoices, communicate up with a report. Right? That's all a workflow. And that's your whole day. Likely 80% of most people's days are spent on the computer, on their laptop terminal, just going through workflows. And so if you think about a smart bot in the sense of its purest form, we are just literally designing what a human does and their day-to-day task all the way through. Now, how do we do that? It's pretty cool. So we containerize a bunch of different technologies to mimic a white-collar human worker. It's basically a combination of logic, code, and processing power. We use serverless technology, so we don't even use servers anymore. That actually helps us get around data security, regulations. We don't store data, all of that. We literally just do what a human does, which is sees workflow, processes data, moves it through a system, and completes its job. And right now, our technology, we can mimic the workflow of 100,000 a year, fully burdened, like healthcare worker. And that takes about 3 months to replicate. And now that does sound scary, but actually what we found is a lot of people are very excited when they get these bots is because instead of having to basically do their workflow, they can increase their capacity. We've seen up to 10 times capacity increases in some cases. So instead of you having to spend 80% of your day just going through a workflow, you can spend 20% of your day managing the bot to do your workflow and then actually improving the process, which we find to be much more value added as a human than actually operating the system.
I like the Excel macros analogy because I was doing a lot of macros in my early years and some of my old finance jobs. It was a lot of Excel macros. So the idea of that on steroids, I could have gotten a lot more done right there. Or could you dig into the data more? Oh, if I could really do it quicker or more advanced, what more could I have figured out? Or what other projects could I have worked on that I didn't have time to work on? So I totally appreciate that analogy. You mentioned healthcare as an example. That industry is so horrible as an end user. Like I was just online trying to figure out some insurance deductible reimbursement. It's just horrible, right? As an end user. So how are you helping your healthcare customers? What's the need that they're looking for? We know they're always understaffed, right? So this is not an issue of, hey, people are going to lose their job because we, have all these bots. This is, we don't have enough people. So it's either the bots or bust at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think healthcare is a really prime example of where we've seen a lot of cost bloat happen in the system. And so we think about it like we want to solve the most near pain point for most CFOs at healthcare organizations, which is revenue cycle. How do they get cash moving through the system faster, right? And so there's five use cases that we prioritize our healthcare providers or healthcare customers that really seem to solve pain points with basically they've got staff just processing these things. It's going too slow. They're creating backlogs. So that would be claims processing, insurance payments, Medicaid eligibility, patient eligibility, or patient invoicing. So we've created bots that basically can mimic those roles. We give those and deploy those bots to our healthcare customers, and then they can increase their capacity by 3x to 10x per person managing the bot. And so a lot of people fear that like, oh, is this going to take my job? No, we actually haven't seen healthcare customers get rid of people. What they do is they just don't hire more people to run the systems. They basically can 3 to 10x their capacity, which really solves the cost problem. Because we have a growing demand problem in America, growing demand for healthcare services as we have an aging population. So there will be growing demand, and we cannot keep hiring in the healthcare system at the same rate to solve that demand. The cost structure will just get too bloated. And a really great use case that we deployed, this is our first bot. And so at the time I moved to South Florida, I had just met my now fiance, and I moved from San Francisco. So I got out of business school. I left Berkeley, and I was like, all right, I want to start a company, right? Like every entrepreneur, like what's the thing? And my fiance at the time was like, all right, well, yeah, just like do it. So I did it. And I remember I was like, well, I want to start a relationship and a company, which is like, maybe not the best to start at once, but I learned a lot through that too. And when I moved down to South Florida, my undergrad roommate is the CFO of a behavioral healthcare organization, mid-market. So there was no like logic at the beginning. I just like fell into a really great use case for a bot. And he comes to me and he goes, hey, I've got 2 people at the time, this is before COVID, full-time processing invoices for patients. And he said, I got a backlog. They can only process 15 each a day. And he said, I got to keep hiring people. Then COVID hit. They actually had to do a reduction in force. And he's like, I've only got 1 invoicer now. I've got a huge backlog. How am I going to do this? So we came in, we mapped out the workflow. We gave that person a bot, which basically just helped make them superhuman. And that person now can process, they went from 15 a day, 1 person can process 200 invoices a day. So in theory, to get to that point of scale, they would have had to hire more than 10 FTE to process that. So now he's like, great, now I've got all this, surplus. Now I'm going to focus on outcomes like dialing for dollars to increase collections, which humans are better at than bots. Things that really humans can focus on to leverage their value. So that was our first use case. That bot's been deployed for over 2.5 years now, still adding value. And it's almost become like an employee that is a member of the team. Sometimes they name the bots. That's a really interesting phenomenon we've noticed, that people will give them names. Some of them are called like R2D2, and they want to humanize it because they are like looking to them as friends. So I do see a very positive sentiment towards our smart bots that we deploy.
Are there any industries in particular that you run into where they are more reticent to take on the bots? Like there's just, hey, this is how we've always done it. We don't like your approach. Your approach doesn't fit with our culture or our tradition.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's generally laggard industries that are like slower to adopt the new thing. But I would actually say that anything in non-tech is probably like a little more laggard in the sense that they've got some system that's old. It's very legacy. They probably should be moving to some, newer technology, but most companies are not tech companies. They aren't staffed with engineers, full stack engineers or Python engineers that can do this. So I would actually say most of the industries we're in, which is healthcare, but we're also in legal services, so doing a lot of paralegal automation. We have also just gotten into real estate property management, which is also a little bit of slow moving in the tech space. So I think most large industries that you can think of, insurance, healthcare, financial services, back office, are laggard. And this actually helps them get up to speed faster. The bots actually turbocharge those systems that they've installed from the 90s and 2000s, because most of them aren't willing to rip and replace those systems at this point. It was expensive. I mean, just to give you context, the first project I mentioned at the beginning of this, the aerospace client, they spent over $500 million implementing an ERP system. Most people don't want to go through that pain again of 5 to 10 years of implementing a new system. So bots really become a meaningful solution instead of hiring people to solve needs where innately software problems.
$500 million. I assume your product is a little cheaper than that. How do you price this out? How do you measure what the value is, or at least in terms of what you charge a customer?
Yeah, so we've taken a very consultative approach. I come from management consulting, and then I got into tech, and so I really do believe there is a lot of value in the front end being more like a consulting firm where we help our customers. We're partnering with them. We're assessing not only the design of the bot, we're helping them re-engineer the process, which is really important. Really great bots start with really great processes, junk in, junk out. So we really take a white glove service model to that approach, and we've seen customers really like that. We walk them through, how are they going to install this with their current employees, the change management aspect. We assess the value with them. We give them calculators so they can say, hey, wait, how much is this? And then we come to sort of this like middle ground, which is basically like, we know we're probably adding, let's say $1 million of value. And so, in theory, we could charge up to that, but we're not doing that. We want them to see surplus. But we also have our own hard costs. There's complexity. We have to run these bots. The unique thing is they don't actually have to build the bots. So this isn't like we give you a software and you build your bots, which is let's call it the Gen 1 model of automation in AI. We actually do all the builds. And think of our technology as the gigafactory. Like you come to the store, you like buy a bot. Let's say it's on Amazon, like you're buying a product. You get that product to your door in a day and you're like really excited, but you don't care how it got there. Most of our customers, they like our model because of that. They buy bots from our store. We run it through our data factory, and we have bots that build our bots. So if you can understand, we are actually already like automating the bot builds that automate the software. We're like in the third order of software. And it's really cool is that because of our technology, we can get to them faster and cheaper. To give you a cost comparison, if you were to enlist me, at a professional service firm at Deloitte, plus buy a big package vendor, RPA solution, plus do this in-house, per bot, you're going to spend around $500,000 to get about 100K of net value. So it'll be about 5 years to pay back your investment. We can do it as little as 50,000 for the same bot. So that typically for 100K of value. So typically our customers are seeing payback within 6 months. They are scaling that. And for our customer segment right now, mid-market healthcare, they love that. I mean, 500K versus 50K obviously is a big difference. And it's the decision, well, do I want to hire a person or do I want to try this bot thing? And most customers at this point are like, let's try this bot thing. This seems like a great investment.
And is that a one-time price or do they have to pay ongoing?
So we have an implementation fee that helps us cover, we've got about 30 Python engineers across the world that help us build what we call work blocks, which is basically like the widget of the bot. Like think of it like a Lego set. So we think of all of our bots as Lego sets, and we have a bunch of work blocks that we own that help developers code faster. So they help with all of that, like basically assembling the bot. That's all net new, that's custom. So they help cover the custom portion of it. And then the maintenance is actually the technology we use to keep that bot up and running. So on a typical bot, if you were in-house of Fortune 500, your bot might fail 2 out of 5 times, 60% success rate, which is it's really terrible. Like if a human was failing 2 out of 5 times, they'd probably get fired. So we saw that as a really big issue 5 years ago, and we've really invested in the maintenance aspect. So once we've deployed a bot, we put it into hypercare for a month. Hypercare is basically finding all of the little deltas between the design and the deployment. And then once we've deployed the bot and gone through hypercare, they're typically north of 92 to 98%, somewhere in that range of success. And then our goal is to get to zero maintenance. So basically, we're running at 99.9% success rates because we constantly make them smarter. So we optimize them. So we're adding more code, more logic, so that they mimic more of a human behavior. And so that's why the automation service is really compelling. Is instead of you just getting this thing, you have to maintain it. Eric, I sell you this thing, and then it's like a car. You want to buy the lease, you want to get the maintenance package. You want the 5 years certain. You don't want to have to do that in-house. That stuff's really hard.
You mentioned you've got your own bots making bots. How circular can this go? How far can you take the bots making bots in reality?
You can go as deep into this rabbit hole as you want. We're already thinking about the next layer now. So and this is, I think, an interesting topic, generative AI. What's the difference between generative AI and smart bots, right? Generative AI produces a thing faster. So that thing could be image, text, code, whatever. It's just like you give it the prompt and it produces the thing that you might have spent an hour to produce. That's awesome. That's going to revolutionize a lot of industries. That might get rid of a lot of jobs, but that is going to free up time for people to solve other things. I think that's very interesting. But smart bots process things faster. So it doesn't necessarily produce the thing, but it's going to take that thing and put it through the workflow faster than you could imagine, whether it be a healthcare claim, an invoice, whatever the use case is. So we have actually thought about generative AI in the sense of, well, how can we build smart bots faster? If we could generate our work blocks with generative AI, then we could build bots in as fast as an hour. We could mimic a human in an hour, which would be crazy. We would watch you, we'd spit it out, and then you'd have a fully functioning bot that can replicate $100,000 of FTE. So that is like where this is going. And that's, I think that is a definite, like the market is pushing this with higher interest rates. All companies are looking, instead of growth, it's efficiency, profitability, which, is either growth plus cost cutting. And so we're seeing a lot of customers go, this is actually an existential threat to our company, and we have to do this in order to survive over the next decade.
When you see the stories about Chat GPT or generative AI, whether it's, music being generated, pictures being generated, you obviously know a lot more than I do being on the outside. You're on the inside of this world. What is your perspective when you see some of the news stories and you think they're missing the point here, or like, here's the real use case that's not being talked about? What's your perspective on everything that's happened over the last few months?
Yeah, I mean, I think like all things in life, the media kind of, there's these hype cycles. I think Web3, it was like crypto, Web3, generative AI. I think there's going to be a lot of compelling use cases that come from this. I think helping people produce content faster is really interesting. Produce imagery faster is really interesting. So I'm really excited by that. Now, what I question is, right, and I think we've seen some articles come around, is the accuracy of this, right? So it produces something that looks good, right? Like it's like anything, you trust it, but how accurate is the truth that the model is putting out, right? And so I think we're gonna have whole new industries pop up around accuracy of outputs of generative AI models. Can those outputs be trusted to make really big decisions? If you're just producing maybe a blog post for your website for content marketing, that is a use case that's very interesting because it just solves a time problem, just savings of time. Or producing an image, that's interesting. But if you're actually putting out literature that people are reading and trusting and making decisions on, I think that's going to come into the same problem which people are having now, is like, who in the media do we trust? Like, who do we trust out there? What information is real and what information is not? And so it's going to come to the same issue that we have in our current information trust networks, which is how we trust this data. And so I'm really excited by it, but I think it's like one of those things we need to really think about as we deploy this, because humans are generally a little dull.
Yeah, I like how you said that. Speaking of humans and human behavior, you've had a point of view, you've been quoted in the press saying you want people in the office 3 days a week. That's kind of your expectation. But I was struck by that because I'm thinking, well, you guys are all about being digital. It's bots, it's workers who don't even exist is your product. And yet you're saying, well, I want my humans in the office most of the time. Why is that? How come you don't think, hey, we're like, in a way, the ultimate digital company? Why do you need people in the office from your point of view?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it does seem hypocritical at first, right? Like, why wouldn't he just be fully automated and remote and optimized? Because humans are still better when we get together and we whiteboard. And we get better when we're creative, when we're thinking about the big problems. That stuff doesn't necessarily happen on Zoom calls. That happens, after hours, getting dinner, that stuff comes up. And I think what really is important at an early stage, we're an early stage company. We have about 45 full-time equivalent people, Python developers and employees. And what's really important about getting together these early stages, especially as we look to raise money next year and keep growing and ride the wave of automation AI, the interpersonal dynamics created by being in the office together are what make the magic happen. People willing to debate, with people willing to say, no, I don't think that idea is the truth. That comes through going out and getting a drink with your colleague, having dinner, talking in the office. Those interpersonal dynamics create trust, and that trust creates more truth seeking. And we've seen this is when people really develop those relationships, they're willing to say, I don't know if that's the best idea. Here's my point of view. And then okay, I see your point of view. That might have some merit. And then we get to more of a high fidelity solution. Then if we're all on Zoom calls and we're all just saying yes to things, I think that leads to a very mediocre solution. And so I think 3 days a week is a nice number. It gives people, the long weekends. We also say a 3-day average, which I think is very flexible. So, you come in Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We're not trying to create some sort of inorganic structure, we think like humans do. I mean, generally we all love freedom, right? That's our like, we want to feel free. So we don't want to make this a tyrannical structure. But it is important that people get together and talk about the problems and build those interpersonal dynamics. I think at the end of the day, we've seen in the tech industry, obviously, a very sad time, a lot of layoffs happening, and yeah, it's very difficult. But a lot of companies went with hiring to solve problems versus, wait, let me solve the problem and think about that before I hire people. And I think we need to get back to, let's solve the first principles problem before we start just going on hiring sprees again. Because we're going to repeat these cycles. Interest rates will go back down, VC money will come back, companies will overhire. This is not the first time this cycle's happened. So I think this is a really interesting time that we think about our problems in a more holistic way. And then we decide if we want to really bring people into our organizations and if we need as many people as we used to.
You mentioned in a recent post the idea of don't just quit, right? There's so much talk about, hey, oh, you can get a better job, blah, blah, blah. And we saw a lot of this, right? The quiet quitting or the outright quitting or the grass is greener, I'm going to make more somewhere else. And that's changed a bit all of a sudden in the last few months. But you wrote about like, hey, you can't just do that, right? Like there's, how did you put it better than I could put it? Basically, you know, something like the grass isn't greener, or do you even have something lined up? People want to quit and they've actually got no plan B. They're just quitting for quitting's sake.
Yeah, it's I think it's fear is driving the decision, not love. And I think generally you can classify decisions in two buckets. So it's like, am I making this decision out of love for my fellow person, or you know, whatever the thing is, or am I making this out of fear or angst towards my employer? And I think decisions where you're like, hey, I had a really great time, I learned from this employer, I want to go off and start my own company because I really feel like I've got the skills to do that. I think that's a really great way to do anything in life. To leave a company because you hate your boss, you feel victimized to the work, I think that's not going to solve the innate problem. And so anything in life is hard, right? Like starting a company is hard, starting a podcast is hard. Whatever your passion is, it's going to take hard work and discipline. That's the truth. And so I think when I saw those lyrics and I made that, or you know, Beyonce's lyrics or quiet quitting, you know, this is a troubling trend because what are people going to do if they're not willing to work to achieve something, right? Automation AI might fill that gap, but we're going to have a lot of people that don't want to necessarily work for the achievement or the thing or the passion. And that is probably a troubling trend at scale.
The layoffs that have happened, they've happened in big tech companies. Obviously, they're in a different boat. They don't have a burn rate, but a lot of these smaller companies, you'll look around, it's like 50% layoffs or huge proportions of people. And you've written about the burn rates. What's been some of the lessons that you've had in running this company and watching maybe some of your colleagues, friends, you know, accelerating that burn rate and causing a lot of layoffs from mistakes that maybe from the outside, from your perspective, you think could have been avoided?
Yeah, it was a really crazy time to be a tech entrepreneur the last 2 years, especially with COVID. There was sort of this like initial fear early on in 2020, and then it all came back, you know, stimulus, interest rates staying at zero, and that just led to a lot of, you know, wishful thinking that the markets, this was a new normal. We were just going to keep accelerating and growing into infinity. I remember it was early last year, I remember feeling this, like this has got to end at some point. I watched I'll give credit, I watched the All In podcast religiously. So those 4 on that podcast, I highly recommend. We're talking about this, like at some point, when you look at revenue multiples and valuations, you look at debt ceilings, you do all the math. At some point, math is like the truth, right? Like math is the truth. It breaks. The system will break at some point. And I think I saw that, and I just like, well, you can't run a company blindly to that behavior that's going on in the background. And so I think ever since, at least for us, I remember the Russia-Ukraine war broke out. We actually have engineers in Kiev, and actually that week we were going to go to Kiev, and we had to cancel that trip because we were like, yeah, the war broke out, and we're like, this is wild. Like they were not expecting that the war would break out. Our Python engineers who work out of Kiev, and so ever since then we've just had to adjust to the world that we're living in now. And I think that's really hard for an entrepreneur sometimes because you have this model and this vision, and you're like, well, I got all the money and I just keep going. But if you don't recognize what's happening around us in the world, you'll just burn all your money and realize we're maybe in a new system, we're in a new macro environment. This might have been a shift change into something new that we all have to maybe pause and wait and see, observe, orient around this new macro system before we start burning money into it. Because once you burn it all, you don't get it back. And I think that's for entrepreneurs, you should realize every month you look at your burn number and you're like, all right, I burned it. How am I going to reduce that or optimize that? And so that's why we're very focused on efficient hiring. We got our burn down very aggressively, quickly, so that there's this really great chart. Actually, it's like a Sequoia put it out. It's called Survival Quickest. It's the companies that drop their burn really fast and then preserve themselves. These are the companies that will survive the next 2 or 3 years. Every company who did not do that will wish they had done that when they have to. So it's going to be, I think, 2023 this year is going to be very difficult for a lot of startups.
And then just closing up, as I think about the future, right? In a world where generative AI exists, your company exists, Excel macros have mutated into these digital worker bots. What should a kid be learning these days, right? Like, what should a kid be thinking about for the future where, okay, I'm a student now and I'll be in the workforce in 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. And the tools that are out there right now, the things that I'm being taught about now, they're not going to matter. So I need to focus on what will matter later. How do you give advice for a world that is rapidly changing?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think, if you would have asked that question 3 years ago, I said like code. But now you see generative AI, you can tell ChatGPT to write you a Python script. And so I don't even know if that's true, what's going to be available in 20 years. What I think will be needed in 20 years that people will need to orient around is, what do humans desire, right? It's like health, wealth, relationships. And so if you can orient your career around, assuming, we're still on the planet, right? Like the needs of humans. So health, for example, healthcare, right? Minimizing costs, new healthcare solutions. We've seen that in the mental health space, the growing area. So, maybe focusing more on that area as a kid. I would say maybe more trades. So Germany is a really great example of not necessarily a higher education system, but a trade system. So we still have a bunch of stuff, assuming we're still driving cars, and we're going to need mechanics. We're going to need electricians, like all this stuff. Physical robots are actually much harder, right? To build and deploy and automate. Software robots are much easier. So I don't see us having physical automated solutions and spaces for many decades. So getting back more into the physical world, like analog, I think will be a place where there's alpha for children to create a career. And I think relationships, right? Like the best deals will still be done between people. So learning how to interact with people, I think that's again something that's very hard for an AI or automation to do. And so kind of focusing in health, wealth, relationship areas, I think we'll have defensibility at least for the next 20, 30 years.
I like that. It is very different, right? All of a sudden, you're right. It's learn how to code. Now it's like the computer's coding itself. You need to learn about the real world, physical things, and talking to people. And I'm glad I got out when I did, because I was in the old generation, and now I see how rapidly it's changing. I was the guy that I don't know how to fix anything, and I don't know how to interact with people, but I know how to code and I know how to do math. And now it's like, that's a skill that nobody needs anymore. So Alex, I appreciate the time. I know we could talk all day. You're so good. You don't shy away. You answer every question. I'm so impressed with what Thoughtful has done. I sort of want to I know they're not cheap. It's almost like I want some free demo bot that can do all of my nonsense here at home. They would be great to have. But Alex, appreciate the time today.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Really appreciate it.
Thank you to my guest, and thanks for listening. Subscribe to get the latest episodes each week, and we'll see you next time.